This is a Parshat podcast brought to you by Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study, and I'm your host, Yosefa Fogel-Rubel. Let's learn. Welcome back to the Matan Podcast, where this year we're exploring the weekly Haftorah portion. This week's podcast is sponsored by Rabbi Michael and Jerry Laxmeter for the refuah shlema of their granddaughter, Abigail Sarah Batshena Arona. For those of you who listen weekly, sponsoring an episode can be a great way to honor a memory, a friend, and even mark a momentous occasion. For more information, contact me at podcast@matan.org.il or the Matan office. Parshat Beshalach begins as the Israelites leave Egypt and ends with the war against Amalek. In this light, on their way to freedom, the nation is flanked by military obstacle. The emotion of regret also features central in our Parsha. First, God is concerned that the people might regret their exit from Egypt and thus takes them on a different route, farther from Egyptian troop encampments. And next, we learn that Paro and his servants regret their allowance of the Israelites' exit. The chase is on until the Egyptians are sunk into the depths of the ocean, while the Israelites walk through safely to the other side. After the miraculous sea crossing, we meet a series of complaints as the people begin their travels in the desert. Not enough water, not enough food, not enough meat, not enough water. Again, this initial exit is really disheartening. Their transition into a new supernatural existence requires more effort and faith than they anticipated. It feels a little bit like boot camp, tironut in Hebrew, and like most young soldiers report, it's a pretty disastrous moment in time as one adjusts to entirely new circumstances, however temporary they may be. This is because the change is not merely physical, from a land of plenty to the desert's desolation, but also theological. They have supplanted a human master for a monotheistic relationship with God, which will take most of the biblical period to actually solidify. This week's Haftorah, taken from the book of Shoftim, is quite overtly parallel to the downfall of the Egyptians by the sea and the subsequent Az Nashir, the Song of the Sea. Ashkenazim read both the narrative and poetic telling of Devorah's victories, and Sfaradim read just the poem form in chapter 5 in Perek Hey in Sefer Shoftim. To unpack this Haftorah choice, I am thrilled to welcome back to the podcast Tamar Weissman. Hi, Tamar.
Hi, how are you, Yosefa?
Thank God. Tamar is a tour guide who's based in northern Israel, whose home and work are deeply rooted in the land. She hosts groups at her farm in the Galil, where she explores Israel's agricultural heritage, the practice of agricultural mitzvot in contemporary life, and the intersection of tradition and innovation through hands-on agrotech, including an aquaponics greenhouse. Tamar is also an author and educator. Her Hebrew book, Ish Kafina Chalato, will be arriving in bookstores soon, and she is currently completing a new book in English on the contemporary relevance of Sefer Shoftim. Her shiurim can be found on the Torah in Motion website. Okay, Tamar, I'm really excited to be sitting here with you, and I knew that for the book of Shoftim, I wanted to turn to you to talk about this. And I know that you have a really unique way of looking at this story and at this narrative. So if I could just bring our listeners in for a moment and remind them that Devorah and the wars that she fights, that she's engaged with, along with Barak, and of course Yael is significant there as well, we have it almost in two renditions. We have Perek Daled in the book of Shoftim, which is the narrative telling of the story of their fight against Sisera and Yavin Melech Nan, and we have this what seems to be one of the most epic wars in the period of the Shoftim in the north of Israel. And then after that in Perek Hey, in the 5th chapter, we have the poetic telling of the story. Now, questions about the correlation between the narrative and the poem are always significant questions when it comes to Tanakh study. We have the same question when it comes to how much is Az Nashir actually connected to the events of the crossing of the sea. But why don't you jump into that, into the way you see the story itself, and I would even say the way we look at Devorah.
Okay, thanks. I think that there definitely is what to be said, and I think we'll get to it a little bit later, about the comparison of Shirat Hayam from Parshat Beshalach with Shirat Devorah from our Haftorah, and the trajectory from one to the other. But when we meet Devorah, I'd like to talk for a second about the circumstances that this Neviah comes onto the scene. I think that it's very important to always look at the context in which each Moshiach, each savior, each Shofet is appearing for us within Sefer Shoftim. And the context of Devorah is a very particular enemy that conveys a particular concept, and Devorah is primed as the leader of that generation to counter that concept. So I think in order to understand her story and her shira, we have to really go back to who Yavin is, what Chatzor symbolizes, and Sisra as well. And so I think of Yavin and Chatzor, Yavin, the king of Chatzor, as a specter, as a ghost of Israel's past, as it were. It would be akin to looking at our current circumstance in 2026 and seeing the Third Reich rise again, or seeing the Egyptian army back to the power that it had back in 1948. In that, just a few generations earlier, Joshua had entirely decimated Chatzor. He had killed all of the citizenry of Chatzor. He burned Chatzor down entirely. It was a symbol for this nascent nation that had entered into the land of Israel, of the ability of Am Yisrael to, under divine guidance, to utterly destroy the Canaanite powerhouse. And so when you see a resuscitated Chatzor, then you're facing down a ghost. And it's a type of psychological trauma. It's a type of threat that is not the same as facing an enemy that you've never encountered before. It's a certain despair, I feel, that Am Yisrael certainly felt, in that their recent memory had seen the total devastation of Chatzor, and here it's back. And then Chatzor partnering with Sisra, who is symbolizing a different threat in my mind. Sisra is the leader of a place called Charoshet HaGoyim. And Charoshet HaGoyim is most likely located at a distance from Chatzor, which is in the northeast quadrant of Israel. Charoshet HaGoyim more likely on the coast. We can translate, as the classical commentaries translate that place, the craft place of the nations, Charoshet HaGoyim, like the factory of the nations. And we know that that is where Sisra oversaw this massive armament factory that produced 900 iron chariots. And so the threat that Sisra poses for Am Yisrael is not the same as Yavin Melech Chatzor's threat, which is the threat of a resuscitated enemy that we had thought we had vanquished entirely, but comes back in the next generation bigger and stronger than ever. With Sisra, the threat is of technological dominance that Israel just lacks. Israel does not have this technology at its disposal. And it means that the hashlachot, the ramifications of that, is that Israel is then pushed to the hinterland east, and they're pushed to the mountainous region, and they have to give up the coast and the flatlands of the west. And so this dual threat is enervating for Am Yisrael. It drains them in a way that they had not been drained prior. And if we look at the verse that describes the feelings of Am Yisrael when they face down Chatzor and Sisra, this dual threat, the verse in Shoftim Perek Daled says, "Vayitzaku b'nei Yisrael el Hashem," that the Israelites cried out to God, "Ki tishamei ot rechav barzel lo," for Sisra had this massive weaponry at his disposal that Am Yisrael was just the David to Sisra's Goliath there. And he oppressed Bnei Yisrael and with great strength for 20 years. And this language of tza'ak is something we haven't seen before. It's a precedent. As you pointed out earlier, this battle is very different than the earlier battles that the Israelites had to face after the death of Joshua. When they faced down other enemies like Moab, like Aram Naharaim, even some Plishtim skirmishes. This is an enemy of an entirely different nature, and it causes Israel to cry out, to wail in a way that they hadn't prior. The Malbim points out that sa'ak is different than za'ak. It's a stronger language of despair. And lachatz is, the Midrash points out, is a very specific type of oppression. Not an oppression of bondage per se, but an oppression of ridicule, where your enemy mocks you and says, there is no way that you could possibly stand up to us. I mean, I think of, again, Israel, a nascent Israel in 47, 48, newly born, and facing down 6 enemies with very little hope that they could outmaneuver these massive armies that were threatening to snuff us out. And so it is this kind of massive despair that's coming from both Chatzor and Sisra in 2 different ways, facing down the ghost of the past that you thought you had bested, and looking at a far superior force that is threatening you, that causes Israel to just give up and to just, I think that it's quite clear, and maybe we'll explore this in just a little bit later, that Israel's situation is very similar to the situation of the Israelites back in Egypt. Of course, the circumstances are different. There wasn't that bondage and enslavement, but the language is the same language of oppression that we find in Egypt. In the 3rd chapter of Shmot, Tza'akat b'nei Yisrael ba'elai. The same tza'ak, that same language of the wails of Israel have come to me. V'gam ra'iti et halachatz. And that same language of lachatz that is delivered to us in the context of Yavin, Melech Hatzor, and Sisra is found in the context of the Egyptian oppression. This tza'ak and the lachatz speaks to us of the sense that the Israelites in Egypt had also given up.
So according to the theory that you've explained so far, we have the idea that this is an oppression or an enemy that is hitting Am Yisrael in a certain space. And you said earlier that the leader that's called upon is the right person to reply or to respond to these specific oppressions. Before I want to hear how you think Devorah is the right response for that, I'm thinking back to the Torah in the case of Moshe, meaning why is Moshe, it seems, maybe the right leader, right? He has this importance of seeking out justice. He has this, dual cultural identity, which, aligns him in interesting ways. And also, of course, as all of those with dual identities knows that you're never fully in either of them, but he has both of those sides to him. So I'm curious how Devorah, obviously her identity as a woman, as a prophetess, right? And as someone who seems to have actually been an adjudicator in a court, as opposed to just being a shofet in the broader sense, the way the book usually means to be like a leader or a leader in war. How is she perfectly suited to be the response to, as you're saying, there's 2 things that these enemies are bringing up. One is a ghost from the past of the Chatzor that we thought we destroyed in Yoshua, but then it comes back. And also this technological threat. How is she the right person to respond to that?
I think of Devorah as very near parallel to Miriam. And you brought up Moshe, but I think that the catalyst for Moshe's leadership comes through Miriam's galvanizing of the nation. And that Miriam precedes Moshe on the ground. She sees a nation that is steeped in despair, and she sees a nation whose leadership has given up and doesn't see a future for itself. And she goes to her father as one of the national leaders and says, you must reconnect with Yocheved, my mother. You must not give up.
In the Midrash, yeah.
In the Midrash, exactly. And she knits back the nation together, a nation whose male leadership had given up mikotze ruach u'me'avodah kasha. And she is as a prophetess herself, sees the potential of Moshe and sees his greatness, ensures his salvation, and ushers in this era of salvation. B'zchut nashim tzidkaniot negalu avotenu miMitzrayim. So while I'm sure there is much to say about parallels between Moshe and Devorah, I think the most evident parallel here is the specific, let's say, feminine discipline of of being able to withstand the despair that the nation can sink into, to offer assurance, to offer reassurance, to offer the strength that indeed we can continue forward. And Miriam embodies that reassurance and that consistency, and that's picked up very strongly by Devorah. And I see Devorah as the personality here, who we'll get to in her prime description as Aim B'Yisrael, as the mother within Israel. But even in her role as a mother, will be that steadying force that will insist that Israel not cave to their despair. But even prior to that, as you pointed out, there's a duality here between the 4th chapter and the 5th chapter of Judges, where in the 4th chapter, Deborah is not described as a mother. She's described as a leader who is not coming into leadership through some kind of a charisma of her own or a power maneuver. Her leadership precedes the crisis. She's described as someone, he shofta et Yisrael be'etahi. She was the leader. She was the judge. She was the political, spiritual leader, and not a leader who arises, as we see with other leaders and other shoftim, other saviors, who arise in response to a threat, but the leader who, it seems, had been there all along. I see within the description of Devorah initially that it's not only the fact that she precedes the crisis, but that she's described by her femaleness. Devorah Isha Nevi'ah. She is an Isha and a Nevi'ah, which is extremely redundant. Would we not suffice with Devorah Nevi'ah? Devorah was a prophetess. Nevi'ah is the female version of prophetess. So Isha Nevi'ah highlights the fact that she is a female. And she is also the only, as you pointed out earlier, the only shofetet who's described as a prophet. No other shofet, though there were others who spoke with God, is ever described as a prophet. And she is a woman of industry. Eshet Lapidot is understood perhaps not as the wife of a man named Lapidot, but as someone who was involved in the holy act of creating wicks for the menorah and the tabernacle, or bringing more light into the world. Lapidot from the meaning of fire and illumination. She's further described as financially independent, wealthy. She oversaw the conglomerate of Tamar Devorah, her industry, her company, and the nation flocks to her. Her leadership just takes root naturally, and vayalu elaha bnei Yisrael lamishpat. The people naturally are going to come to this leader who has kind of just been born into leadership without having to arise in response to a threat. She is exposed, visible, available to all. She sits under her Tomer Devorah, not in a tent, not behind a latticed window, but out and unafraid. And I think that it is this symbol of Tomer Devorah that really expresses Devorah's leadership in parallel to Miriam, in that Devorah is coming with no apologies in the open to galvanize a nation that has retreated into its walled cities, into its enclaves, from their great fear of this resuscitated ghost of Chatzar and the industries of Sisera. And she says, no, we are here. We belong here. We will vanquish our enemies. We will overcome, so long as we do not cave to despair.
So I think what's also interesting about this description of Devorah is, as you said, it doesn't. The word Isha is unnecessary, because if it would have said Nevi'ah, would have sufficed, we would have known it's a woman. But clearly, the book of Shoftim is saying, wow, check this out. This is our first prophet our first shofet prophet who's a shofeted prophetess, meaning that there's something specific about the fact that she's a woman. Now, you said earlier that you think that you're picking up on the woman piece is significant for her as the leader at this moment of history, because it reminds us of Miriam and sort of this ability to not not fall into despair, to have a certain degree of hope that we can survive in this moment. Do you think that that's the key, or that's a significant element of her femaleness? Because later on, we'll see that she's described as a mother, but her role as a mother, or whether or not she had a family, is nowhere to be found in this. So I'm curious, is there another element to the femaleness that you think is significant? And I'll just, before you answer, I just want to say, like, the other side of it, because there are less sympathetic, let's say, scholars in the book of Shoftim who sort of say, oh, well, we had all these Shoftim who were like unusual leaders, or they wouldn't have been our go-to. And so we had the left-handed guy, and we had the guy who wasn't sure of himself. And we had, all these different kind of an interesting cast of humans who are our Shoftim. And among them is a woman, right? That's quite unusual, which it is, meaning we have other female figures, of course, in Tanakh, but we have fewer who are leaders as opposed to being, characters in a story. So I'm just curious if there's any other element in your mind about what it says in this parak that has to do with that, because she herself calls attention to her female identity and says to Barak, well, don't take me to war, because if you take me to war, then everyone will attribute it to me because I'm a prophetess, and not to you, and Chaval, because I'm a woman, and then no one will think what you did is unique. So I'm curious how you see those parts.
I think the two are, these two chapters are integrally interrelated. And so when she describes herself as a mother, then she is playing off of her leadership as described in the narrative in chapter 4. And and a mother need not be the leadership figure that forms the nation, that brings the nation into existence. Out
of birth. It's not mother necessarily through birth.
Exactly. She in describing herself in her Holy Shirah as a mother in Israel is offering for us not a new definition of motherhood, but an expanded definition of motherhood. That the job of a mother, the role of a mother, is not just to bring a nation into existence the way that our imahot have done for us, but to bring a nation back to itself, to mother a nation. And that is why she is a quintessential mother. She's a mother not in the sense of actually birthing a people. And we, as you pointed out, we don't know if she had a family of her own. She could have been an independent businesswoman, and we're not clear as to her married status, even though, again, she is called Eshet Lapidot, but the Midrash takes pains to walk away from that definer of her as a wife of, a mother of. No, she's a mother of Israel. That's how broad her definition is. And so her motherhood is communal. It's not domestic. And it's nurturing yet corrective. And I think that the description of her in Perek Daled, and her modality of leadership, and her willingness to be present, even when she feels her children should be able to do it on their own, and they insist that they can't. And so she said, okay, I'm going to come with you, but there has to be a point where you will wean yourself from your need of the leadership that I offer. That she just is the figure who safeguards the family by safeguarding the covenant. She's not, as I pointed out, not a domestic mother, but national. And I'd like to expand a little bit on what I mean by that. Now, when she is describing the victory of God leading Bnei Yisrael into victory over their enemies, she describes the condition of Am Yisrael that I had tried to build through understanding who their enemies were. And she describes it thusly. She says, Chadlu prazon b'Yisrael chadelu. That means that openings or breaches had seized in Israel. Ad shakamti Devorah, shakamti em b'Yisrael, until I appeared on the scene and reinstated those prazot, as it were. And prazot are described by Chazal and by our exegetes as unwalled towns. That Israel had retreated into their caves, their little enclaves. There was a great fear of open roads, of open spaces. And what Devorah does is exposes the paralysis of Israel and its leadership. And she, just as Miriam had done, and says, we can't sustain ourselves like this anymore. We cannot be afraid. We have to move forward. And she returns Israel to their sense of confidence in what they can achieve in the land of Israel. We own
Which I think is connected to, as you said before, where she sits, meaning she sits in an open space, and that itself is significant, right? She's showing them that you can be confident in those open spaces. By the way, I think another piece that it maybe is in dialogue with that is, in general, I'm going to quote a different episode I recorded last year with Yael Leibowitz, but we have a very interesting dynamic between women and space in the book of Shoftim, meaning we have, the book opens and we have Achsa, who's, it's a repeated story from Yeshua, but she's riding out there and asking confidently something of her father. And we have Devorah, of course, and Yael, who's confident in a different space. It's in a tent, but that's its own separate piece. And as we sort of go through the book of Shoftim, women become more and more threatened in open spaces. We have the Bat Yiftach, who she only walks out of her door, and it's a problem, all the way till the end. And a woman is inside of a house, and inside of the house is dangerous for her. And so, you're saying that in the time of Devorah was able to recapture for the people, together with them, to sort of redeem these spaces that they could be confident, they could be secure in their land. But I think that it's also interesting how it kind of has like I'm imagining a Venn diagram. We have also these ideas about women, and the more that the book of Shoftim progresses, the more dangerous, so to speak, like the open spaces become for them. But Devorah is still like this real beacon in the beginning of the book of Shoftim, who not only is she out in open space, but she helps others, remember that they can be confident in those spaces.
Absolutely. In her song, she says, "Bifroa piraot b'Yisrael, behitnadev am, barchu Hashem." When Israel can open themselves up, this language of pri'ah means exposure, and when they can open themselves and commit to God and volunteer for the nation as a united nation that is responsible one for the other, then blessed is God. This idea of pri'ah, of making oneself vulnerable, making oneself open, is described in our Torah Hasod, in the Zohar, as a phenomenon that was lost in Israel. In that, up through the days of Devorah, the Zohar says, from the death of Joshua, Israel had neglected the priya element of the Brit Milah. We know that the covenant of circumcision involves two parts. It's the removal of the foreskin and the exposing of the glands, which is called priya. And Israel just didn't do that second element of the Brit. And the Zohar said it was up to Devorah to recommit Am Yisrael to the priya. This is a very strange idea, right? Like, what is Devorah
it's also
doing?
dancing around the gender element of the story.
Absolutely, because the Zohar will go on to say that the idea of a Brit Milah is making the baby more like his mother, which for women are considered already circumcised. And so, what is the symbolism here of her reinstituting the priya? And reconnecting Am Yisrael to that element of this chok. It comes back to the idea that Brit is a chok. We know this because it is a chok in the sense of a law that does not have a rational explanation. Vayamida liyakov the chok, the Yisrael Brit Olam. The Brit is a mitzvah that seems to defy rational explanation. It's very primal. One can find great meaning within the circumcision ceremony, the act of circumcision, but it is a chok. Now, a chok is a category of law that, as I say, defies rational explanation. And Am Yisrael had, in the age of the Shoftim, in the age of Mishpat, when they come to Devorah for Mishpat, which is the type of law that is rational, that is reasonable, they had abandoned chok. When you abandon that which makes no sense to you, because ish hayashar be'einav yaseh, it's an age where everyone is only doing that which rationally speaks to him, which makes sense to him, which evokes something within him, then you're abandoning the mechokikei Yisrael, the lawgivers of Israel. And when Devorah says, Libi lechokekei Yisrael, hamitnadvim ba'am, my heart is with those lawgivers, those who will deliver chok. The maternal role almost can be expanded, not just to reconnect Am Yisrael to their source and to commitment, but also to that which defies rationality. Our relationship with our mother is the most primal relationship that we have with another person in this world, and it defies rationality.
One additional thought regarding the comparison to Yael, because in the song itself, she says, Tevorach min nashim Yael, and she doesn't call Yael a mother, meaning the characterization of Yael is of a Isha, but that Isha specifically, right, gives him, in the song, gives him milk, right, and brings him close.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that in the way that Yael is presented, even though she's kind of in the more quintessential mother space, I think it's just this strengthens the point you're making, meaning about the aim here not being about that space. But Dafka, the woman who's in the maternal space and doing the thing that seems maternal and also slightly sexual, depending on how you read the narrative, is that she's described as an Isha. And Devorah is sort of taking this title of Em and her character itself, and also what she says, so much broadens, right? So much broadens the way that what that really could mean. And I definitely am also thinking as you speak in terms of contemporary relevance, but I'm curious where this takes you in terms of this role of Em Yisrael.
Absolutely. But the entire telling of that is almost like an anti-mother. It's like the evil mother, like using the motherly instinct in order to damage the child. Mm-hmm. But in that same space, in the same description of Yael, is Sisra's mother, who caused him the greatest damage in that she formed him into this into this creature who had no idea of rachamim other than rechem rochmatayim, other than wombs for the taking, right? Like she like no concept of how the female force, as it were, could work to lead a nation. And so this duality of showing both Yael and Em Sisra, one as a mother who has all the trappings of motherhood there, but is not, but is weaponizing that motherhood against her enemy, and with the Em Sisra, who should have nurtured her child towards a life of meaning and productivity, but instead created a monster who she glorifies in his potential rapes of all of his victims. There's all of these images of women and how they can vanquish their enemies or lead their people or bring their people to disaster.
I'm curious where you think about this in contemporary ideas. I know that's something also that I cut you off before you were about to say, but I think that this idea of Em Yisrael as being something that's much broader than the actual children she has. I'm curious also where that takes you.
Instinctively, intuitively, it takes me to who I personally think of as our contemporary Em Yisrael, and that would be Miriam Peretz, who's very much an ima and came to her leadership role as a private ima, and after having experienced this unfathomable loss of two of her children, who were both killed as heroes in Israel in different wars, she rose to lead Israel at its critical moments of uncertainty and despair, and when we pull back into the frightened child mode, she says, no. We belong here. We will vanquish our enemies. We have every right to live freely and comfortably and confidently in our land. And she's the maternal point that never asserted herself onto the field, but draws all of Israel after her. I think that's fair to say that that Israel comes to Tomer Miriam, as it were, and draws our strength very, very, very clearly from her example, from the leadership that she took on, and I'm sure she would say took on reluctantly. So while that is definitely one modality of leadership, it's clearly one that comes from the fact that she was a mother. But I also think of other figures that have female figures specifically that have risen to lead Am Yisrael over the last period, especially this last period of war, when we have been devastated in so many different ways. And they lead Israel through their confidence and through their insistence that we not retreat. So I think of the principal of the elementary school, of Otef Aza, or of Shtula and some of the kibbutzim and villages of the north, who once their kibbutzim and their moshavim and their cities were emptied in the wake of October 7th, whether it's the north or the south, and they had to reband together and build anew overnight, then these women set up their Tomrei Devorah. They set up their palm trees in the lobby of a hotel or, on the bank of the Kinneret and said, we're going to do this. We're not giving up. You are going to come to class. You're missing your books. We're going to get you your books. You're missing your friends because they're not with you. We are going to overcome that. And we are going to be a constant, and we are not going to cave. And so it's someone like that who, for me, seems to be an Am Yisrael in a way that a political leader or a rabbinic leader, and those are both necessary and they both serve roles, is not even as essential as the Imahot B'Yisrael. And I think if we look, all of us can think about the Imahot B'Yisrael. Again, many of them Imahot Shkulot, many of them mothers who have lost children, who have risen because of circumstance, but also many who aren't in those horrific circumstances, who have risen to say, we are not going to cower, we belong here, we are staying here. If it means taking placards and going out to the streets, if it means being in my kita hitkonenut, my neighborhood watch, so that we don't become a little walled village, but that our children can feel confident and free. And it means that I have to get up in the middle of the night to go do my shift, whether it means that I'm going to add another shift to my ambulance route so that I can spell a father who is in Miluim, who is in reserves. Those are the Imahot B'Yisrael that Devorah has modeled for us.
Tamar Weissman, thanks for being on the podcast. Really appreciate you coming here and sharing these perspectives. I think that the idea of highlighting the Am Yisrael when the identity of Devorah wasn't a mother, I think that you really articulated really powerfully what that image looks like, and that we're really surrounded by people like that all the time. So really appreciate you being here and sharing your ideas with us today.
Thank you so much. It was an honor and a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode from Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. If you would like to sponsor an episode, please contact the Matan office or email me at podcast@matan.org.il. Please do us and all women's Torah learning a favor and share this episode with all of your friends and family.